talk a little bit about the correlation between time in this film. It's shot in real time, which, if anyone isn't clear about that term, it just means that every minute in the film, the audience also is experiencing that same time. So it's a 90-minute film, so we see Cleo for 90 minutes. So I just want to talk about that.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Firstly, hello, audience. Thanks for coming out. I hope you enjoyed the film. There are so many questions I have for you, too. So I wish we could all talk together in a more real-time like environment. But I guess what you're experiencing, as Laura points out, is right now real-time, even though I'm hearing myself talk, seeing myself. Anyway, okay, so a couple of things. We've got 5 to 7 as part of the title itself, right? So we know that we're going to be with her for 2 hours, even though, as Laura mentioned, the film itself is only 90 minutes, right? So there's already some discrepancy between what we're told we'll be experiencing and what actually is happening. The fact also that throughout the film, as Varda is quick to point out, we have all of these clocks that are staggered and planted in the mise-en-scène, right? The setting, in the room, and so forth. We have clocks in the street, we have clocks in the home, all of these images that are reminding us of the time, right? And so there's a way in which we have an opportunity, I guess, to identify with this character, not only through seeing things through her eyes or experiencing her feelings, but also sitting in our seats for the duration of her walking through these streets. I didn't mean to rhyme that, but...
Okay. My next question, and this is, I guess, a two-parter, and I wanted to kind of go into this, but I wanted you to talk about whether or not you see this as a feminist film, and also whether or not you see Varda as a feminist film.
Sure. I think my first and most basic or simple answer would be yes, absolutely, right? That I love teaching Cleo from 5 to 7 and studying it and thinking about it for any number of reasons, one of which is that it's kind of startling to experience a film where a female character is the subject of the film, but we don't have this kind of melodramatic pressure on her to bear all of this sentimental and conventional meaning, right? When we have Cleo in her loft and she's looking in the mirror and the harp music is accentuating the femininity of that moment, it's kind of like a cinematic example of how women are often shot in films, right? That they're this beautiful puppet or doll or some figure to be adored, and the style is supporting that. Whereas in Cleo from 5 to 7, we have this quotation of that particular traditional style. I'm sorry, I talk with my hands, and I can see myself, but it's kind of agonizing. All the while that the film radically shifts in that second portion, where suddenly she's the person who's seeing things, right? And I'm sure, as Laura pointed out in the copy for Cleo from 5 to 7 as well, right? She's suddenly a subject. The camera is representing her point of view, and she's having conversations with women, with men. Her anxieties come to be taken on by the camera itself, and her joy as well, right? By the end of the film, when she says, "Today everything amazes me," that's a sentiment that the camera also has been sharing with its attention to all these intricate details of Paris on this particular June day, right? So there's, I think, something feminist about how the camera is honoring a female character in ways that haven't historically been shown to us. In that sense, I think of Varda as a feminist director for her interest in giving us that experience, especially for her alignment of style with a character's interiority, especially when it's a woman, for all the ways women have been shown to be the superficial or the external beauty. Think about Dorothy in the sculpting studio as well, right? She's modeling. There are all these people who are looking to her as some example of the female form, but they're not kind of ogling her, right? It's a different look from how the men look to Cleo in the beginning of the film as she's walking down the street and they're kind of whistling and noticing her, and she doesn't have much agency there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I have 2 more.
Sure.
One is more just a historical point, and I was hoping you could talk about the role of women in the French New Wave movement.
Sure.
Both on screen and off, like behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Well, in thinking that you might ask this question, I found my book, A History of the French New Wave Cinema by Richard Newport. Perhaps you've heard of this book. It's a pretty excellent history. It's so thorough. But for what it's worth, Varda is the only woman who's mentioned in the titles of all of the chapters, right? So, of course, we have chapters on Truffaut and Godard and Chabrol and Romer and Astruc and Melville and so forth. These men are figuring into the titles, but Varda is the only woman here. We, of course, have plenty of stunning and beautiful and famous female stars, right? Godard's wife, Anna Karina, stars in a number of his films. Also Catherine Deneuve and Jean Barreau are in by Louis Malle and Francois Truffaut. But Varda is the one woman who is behind the camera in these particular films, and she's really significant in that aspect. Her husband, Jacques Demy, he's also kind of peripherally part of the French New Wave. He's making these exciting, vibrant, colorful musicals. Perhaps you've heard of The Umbrellas of Cherbourg or The Young Girls of Rochefort. So she's connected up to the men of the French New Wave by marriage, but also by her working with them. As you perhaps noticed, I don't know if you did, the short film in Cleo from 5 to 7 actually features Jean-Luc Godard and Anna Karina, so they're playing a role literally in Varda's own film here. I just read in the history of the French New Wave that Varda actually took the wedding pictures for Jean-Luc Godard and Anna Karina, right? So there's this friendship that's happening outside of the films themselves, but she's really the lone woman in a group that is primarily a boys' club. What's interesting about Varda also as an historical figure, her background for filmmaking comes from photography, right? She's not growing up in cinephilia, watching films relentlessly at the Cinematheque with Godard and Romer and Truffaut. She's not writing for Cahiers du Cinéma or any of these film journals. She's a photographer, and it's based on her love of the image that she finally decides she's going to be a filmmaker. It's actually, and I kind of find this endearing about her origins in film, it's out of desire to show a friend who's ill a portrait of the hometown that this friend no longer can visit because friend is ill, that she takes up a video camera and says, well, I'm going, or a film camera I should say, I'm going to show this friend what friend can't see, right? And it's on the basis of that that she starts to realize, wow, this moving image can really be tied to human experience, and it's a much different entry point to cinema than the men of the French New Wave who are coming to it from their post-screening discussions that prompt them to then passionately decide they're going to take a camera up and be filmmakers themselves. I can't tell if I'm talking too much or too little.
No,
I don't have any. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I have one more question, and I'll turn it over to the audience. But I wanted you to talk about a little bit the motif of mirrors in Cleo. I know she uses them in other films as well, but specifically here, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. One thing that I think is really fascinating about mirrors, kind of in any film, but especially in Cleo, is that the mirror gives us as an audience a way to see a character be a spectator, right? So we're watching a character watch themselves, which is kind of like what we're doing when we're watching a film, right? We're watching a character and there's some relationship that we might be projecting onto the screen that can be mirror-like or perhaps like a window into some other reality and so forth. All kinds of things we talk about there. But in any case, in Cleo, we have mirrors from the outset, right? There's this fascination with reflection. She meets with the fortune teller, she descends the stairs, and then she's looking at this mirror, and there's this very narcissistic comment she utters, right? That she talks about herself as a little butterfly, that somehow because she's so beautiful, she can't really be sick. If she looks good on the outside, then her internal situation can only be healthy. And the mirror allows her this validation of her wholeness or her health, right? If she can see herself reflected, then okay, what a relief, she's all right. Over the course of the film, as we see through literal and figurative fracturing, these mirrors are breaking, right? She's in the cafe and you see the little particles. The mirror is kind of fractured as part of the decor. And as we know later, when she drops her bag and the mirror shatters, she talks to Dorothy about the bad luck. But these surfaces by which Cleo comes to find validation of the cohesion of and existence of or health of herself are undone over the course of the film, right? And we can appreciate, if we want to read the film that way, Cleo at the end of the film as not needing this reflection, that she's amazed by what she sees that is new to her, as opposed to this reflection of what is simply herself looking back at her. I feel incredibly self-reflexive in this moment of speaking on Skype about mirrors. Does that answer your question?
No, perfect.
Okay.
And now, if anyone in the audience has any questions they would like to ask Kristi, yeah, you come on that too.
Hi.
Could you explain the use of color in the opening scene of the tarot card reading and when it switches to black and white? Like, I guess could you go on about that a little?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So Varda herself is interested in, as she would claim, you know, if we're lucky, if we have full sight of color as humans, right, what we're looking at is color. It's when we shift to black and white in the film that there's some kind of abstraction, that we don't have, it becomes a different kind of art piece in a way, right? So there's the cards on the table as presenting this immediacy in a way, right? That this color is reflective of our experience of, if we're lucky again, sight in the world. And then the shift to black and white, remember we have the cards in color, then we cut to Cleo and Fortune Teller in black and white. There's some strange kind of juxtaposition of the artificial or the aestheticized faces and then the colorful cards, right? So it's almost as if you look back at that sequence even, the Fortune Teller kind of gives us one way of plotting the whole film. The Fortune Teller even says that you will experience a complete transformation of being, right? And we could arguably take that as a plot summary for what happens in the film, right? And so it seems like we've got this shift in modes. The color, which seems especially bright in retrospect, given that we've been with the characters and the set for 90 minutes, or I guess 87-ish minutes of black and white, that comes to be more vibrant and kind of hyperbolic in retrospect again than the rest of the film. So I don't know if that answers your question, if you want to follow up or anything like that, but I guess my short answer would be a summary of what I started by saying, as the color gives us a corollary to our world, and the black and white becomes this artful depiction. It's kind of flagging from the outset that we're in a film. We're in a representation of the world, and not actually in the color world itself.
Are there any more questions? A couple.
Do I need to come up there?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Hello.
Where do I look? I'm just looking. Okay,
Yeah.
right there. Okay. You mentioned a while ago the musicals of The Umbrellas of Cherbourg and The Girls from Rochefort, and the composer of those musicals did not only wrote the music for this movie, but was in it. And I heard that he was. I've never seen this film, so I'm glad for the opportunity to see this film. But I had heard he was in it, but I figured, well, that he's just playing the piano while, But he actually was a character, and he had a few lines, even though it was basically just that one scene. And I know that he wrote a number of other musicals I don't know if he did any other musicals with Agnes, but he did several with Jacques Demy. And I just wondered if you, I don't really have a question, but I just wondered if you wanted to comment on.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, good.
It's about Michel Legrand. And so in the same year that he scores Cléo, actually, he also scores Vivre sa vie for Godard, right? And there's a number of other films in the French New Wave that he's very actively involved with. I'm always so impressed every time I watch Cléo. I remember him as this charming, funny character, but it's like he steals the show, right? The film altogether becomes a different genre of sorts, right? That we've been with Cléo, she's feeling sorry for herself, there's all of this self-pitying, even her handler, so to speak, becomes impatient with her at times. But then, right, all of a sudden Michel Legrand, as Bob the composer, marches into the scene. He's the play-acting doctor, he's the composer. We watch his fingers on the keyboard, and it's hard not to kind of marvel at how exquisite and real his performance as he's cueing our character to sing and to, you know, perform in the role that he's written for her as composer and his partner as lyricist, right? But all this to say, I guess it's kind of fascinating. There's a beautiful article, actually, by Claudia Gordman on the music in Cléo. It's fascinating. She maps out how the theme that Bob plays for her that marks this big change in Cléo's character is kind of threaded throughout the film in the score itself, and how that's kind of competing with Cléo's pop song that we hear in the taxi and also in the cafe, right? Also, if you recall, as Cléo marches out of her loft, there's this little boy on the piano kind of banging out a theme in a very crude sense. It's a toy piano there on the ground. It's very arbitrary. But even the notes that the little boy plays are somewhat matching in rhythm and tone to the score that Michel Legrand as Bob is introducing in the film itself. So, and I guess this, I mean, there's so many things I want to say about Michel Legrand, but in a film that itself is interested in the self-reflexive creation of images, you also have the music as being something that is shown to be produced, where the composer who cues us to feel certain things in the film is also privileged as showing us how he cues us, right? Does that make sense? So that's my long answer. But if you're interested in Michel Legrand, you should check out Varda's film that's from the mid-90s called The World of Jacques Demy. After Demy passes away, she makes several documentaries that grieve him and mourn him and remember him. And in The World of Jacques Demy, there's an incredible clip where Legrand and Demy are seated together at a piano, and they're preparing the score for Umbrellas. And they actually mark the score with, oh, here's a hanky's going to be needed here, a hanky's going to be needed here, right? Legrand is so interested in cueing the audience to feel things powerfully. That's a long answer, but I'm crazy about his music and how he fits into this history, too. Thanks for asking.
I think we have time for one more question, which is on its way up here.
Okay. I know that I checked dates and everything. I know that this came out like well into the whole French New Wave movement, but I really liked the way this sort of summed up New Wave to me, where the camera becomes subjective and becomes a character instead of just documenting the story as, you know, like Hollywood kind of was up until then. It actually gets into the characters' heads and becomes its own kind of character with the dolly shots and the framing and the composition. And the composition and everything. And I was just wondering how, I guess if you could tell us how this impacted the New Wave movement, because it was still going on for several years after this. And so, like, how was it received?
That's a really great question. What's important to bear in mind, so she has a film several years earlier called Le Point Court, and this is, I think my date's right, 57. It's 59 and 60 that Breathless and 400 Blows and Hiroshima Mon Amour are produced, and then we have this in 61, 62. what always fascinates me, and you can maybe help me with this, or if anyone can provide some research, I'd be happy to learn from you. Varda is often regarded as the grandmother of the French New Wave, even though she's as old as the men who are making films at the same time. So on the one hand, it's like this flattering, honorary title of grandmother, right? She's influencing these people in this gentle, benevolent, important, powerful way as kind of the super matriarch. But she's a contemporary of these directors, right? And so I think it's kind that she's regarded as such. On the other hand, that title removes her from being actively present, historically speaking, right, in what's going on at the time that things are being made. So I think you're reading that, right? The self-consciousness of the camera, the way that the camera swings with her as the music is cueing us in the scene that the gentleman before you asked about with regard to Bob's presence. There we have all of these characteristics that are kind of hardcore French New Wave, or at least what we come to retrospectively identify as French New Wave. What's kind of cool, the reviews of CLEO, one of both the praiseworthy claims and also one of the criticisms is that, well, yeah, this looks just like French New Wave. This seems to be one of those French New Wave kinds of movies, right? It looks a certain way, and so it's fitting the bill. So it, on the one hand, makes Varda's film exceptional and the same as the other films of the time. I'm sorry I use my hands so much. I don't realize what a distraction that could be.
Not a problem.
Thanks for the hand gesture.
We actually have to wrap up, but thank you so much for doing this interview, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Laura, for the invitation, and Cinema 41 for making this possible, and all of you folks in the audience. I hope that you enjoyed CLEO. I hope that you keep thinking about these ideas, not that I've introduced, but that the film does. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and you can find me at Hendrix College in the directory. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm crazy about all these things. Thanks.
Thank you.